I don't care if your mother rose from the grave. Your position's been filled. That's what he said, word for word, in front of the whole department. And the worst part? He didn't even look up from his coffee when he said it. It was Monday morning, 9:02 a.m., sharp. My first day back after burying the only parent I had left. I had emailed HR, gotten official approval from management, even followed protocol down to the damn form ID number. 5 days. That's all I took. 5 days to say goodbye to the woman who raised me, alone, after my father died when I was 13. But the conference room didn't care. The lights above buzzed faintly, too bright against the quiet tension. The projector screen still flickered from someone's failed attempt at sharing a quarterly budget file. Papers shuffled, a throat cleared. My seat, third one from the left, always had been, was occupied by a younger guy in a fitted suit. I didn't recognize him. He didn't stand up. Everyone else turned their heads just slightly, as if craning to watch a car crash they didn't want to admit excited them. The CFO's eyes flicked from me to my boss. A few team leads stared down at their laptops like it was suddenly time to double-check pivot tables. And that's when Mark, my boss of 12 years, took a slow sip of his coffee, set it down, and without even glancing up, said it. I don't care if your mother rose from the grave. Your position's been filled. No apology. No preamble. Not even a trace of hesitation, like he'd rehearsed it, like it gave him a thrill. My breath caught halfway up my throat and just stuck. For a second, I couldn't even hear the room anymore, just the sound of my own pulse rushing in my ears. My fingers trembled around the worn leather strap of my laptop bag. I had baked banana bread for this team. Stayed until 2 a.m. the night our servers went down. I organized our first remote onboarding system during COVID when Mark didn't even know how to unmute Zoom. And now I didn't exist. Someone let out a forced cough, probably trying to break the silence. Another chuckled, low and awkward, like they didn't know if it was a joke or a trap. No one said anything to stop it. Mark finally looked up, smiled faintly, not kindly. You can check with HR if you're confused. But as of Friday, we've moved in a different direction. I'm sure you'll find something eventually. Eventually. He dismissed me like a spilled cup of coffee. Like the smell would fade if he just opened a window. My knees didn't buckle, but only because I locked them. My vision tunneled for a moment as I stood there, still holding the container of lemon lozenges I used to keep on my desk. The one my mom always said made me sound less like a dying frog on client calls. I didn't say anything. Not yet. Because something in me shifted then. Not cracked, not shattered, but aligned. I looked at the new guy sitting in my chair. He blinked and gave me an apologetic half-smile. I didn't return it, just nodded once, slowly. Took a step back. Then I turned, walked out of the conference room, and as I did, a single sheet of paper fluttered from my bag. Mark didn't see it, but the new guy did. He bent to pick it up, paused, and read the bolded line across the top. Confidential, Client Account Reconciliation, FI Audit Trail, Attachment A. I didn't stop walking, and I didn't look back. Not yet. I used to believe loyalty was a currency that never depreciated. For 12 years, I gave that office everything I had, not just hours or deadlines, but the kind of energy you can't clock, the kind that keeps a team glued together when everything else feels like it's falling apart. When I joined the company, we were still a mid-sized firm trying to land its first big healthcare contract. The CEO back then, Robert Shields, had a vision, but no systems, no training structure, no client retention strategy, no standardization across teams. That became my job. No one asked me to do it, not really. I saw the gaps and filled them, quietly, efficiently. I built onboarding manuals from scratch, created SOPs for account transitions, took client complaints at 10 p.m., soothed panicked sales reps, trained new hires when HR was overwhelmed, and the numbers backed it up. Retention rose 27% in the first 2 years. Account satisfaction doubled. But what people remembered wasn't the charts. It was the way I remembered their kids' names, brought extra umbrellas during surprise storms, or stayed behind to lock up even when I wasn't the last to leave. Mark, yes, the same Mark, wasn't always like that. Back then, he'd stop by my desk just to say, "You're the spine of this whole thing, you know that?" He meant it too. I remember once, during a merger scare, he put a hand on my shoulder and said, "No matter what happens, I'm keeping you close. We'd be screwed without you." I believed him. So when he became regional director after Shields retired, I clapped the loudest. He called me into his new corner office that day, poured 2 glasses of champagne, and said, "This means bigger things for both of us." Only, it didn't. It started subtly. At first, it was just skipped lunches. Then, updates I used to be looped into suddenly moved to private Slack threads. Mark started saying things like, "Let me handle this one. You've got enough on your plate," right before taking a project I initiated and presenting it to corporate with his name on it. When I asked, gently, why I wasn't included in the regional operations meeting for Q3, he shrugged. "We needed a leaner group," he said. "Too many cooks and all that." I nodded. But something cooled in my stomach that day, and it never quite warmed up again. Then came the exclusion from the client showcase, one I'd led prep on for 6 months. My name was missing from the agenda entirely. When I brought it up, Mark just smiled, a bit too tight. "Don't take it personally. You're great behind the scenes. Let the others take the spotlight once in a while." Behind the scenes. It stuck in my chest like a dull splinter. I told myself maybe I was just tired. Maybe the years had worn me thinner than I thought. I went home that night and reread old thank you notes from clients, reminders that I mattered, that I had impact. My mother always told me, the work speaks even when people don't. But even she could tell something was shifting. "You sound smaller lately," she said one evening over the phone, "like someone's trying to make you believe you don't take up space." She wasn't wrong. By year 10, I had stopped volunteering ideas at meetings. I started to notice how often people spoke over me, how the interns now looked past me like I was a fixture, not a person. Mark never corrected them. He never stopped them. Then one day, I saw a project proposal that I had written, verbatim, circulating under the name of our newest team lead. When I forwarded it to Mark, just to clarify, he replied in one line, "Let it go. It's not a big deal." It was always not a big deal when it happened to me. But the final crack came 3 weeks before my mother passed. She had been declining slowly, lung fibrosis, stage 4. I was still working full-time, balancing her doctor's visits, setting up hospice care. I went to Mark, documents in hand, and asked for 5 days of bereavement in advance. His response? "If it's really that urgent, take the time, but we need you to wrap up the Dalcor audit first." I stayed late that night, finished everything, even left him a labeled folder with client summaries and backup contacts. And then I left. 5 days. Just 5. I buried my mother on a Thursday. I still remember the smell of lilies in the chapel, the way the light hit her photo on the easel. My phone stayed off the entire time, even though I could feel it buzz in my coat pocket at least a dozen times. When I turned it back on Sunday night, there was a single message from HR. "Please confirm return date. Your position has been reassigned temporarily." Temporarily, but I knew, in my gut, I knew. So that night, I started backing up files, quietly. Just to protect my work, I told myself. Old invoices, reconciliations, client email chains, especially the ones where Mark had missed deadlines or backdated approvals. I didn't plan to use them. Not then. Not yet, but I kept them, just in case. That same week, a younger coworker, Lena, slipped into my inbox with a subject line that read, "Just a heads up." She had seen the new guy training under Mark's direction. No formal announcement, but it was clear. He had my old desk, my project files, even my name on a binder with a Sharpie hastily scratched off. I read the email 3 times before closing my laptop and walking to the window. Outside, the streetlight blinked in rhythm with the thoughts in my head. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. But I did whisper, to no one in particular, "All right, if that's how you want to play this." Because even then, something had begun to stir, quiet, patient, like a tide slowly rising behind the sandbags. They thought I'd fade. They'd forgotten. I'm the one who built the damn floodgates. The days that followed were a strange blur. I wasn't just angry, I was hollow, like someone had scooped out the center of me and left just enough behind to function. I kept telling myself, just breathe, just walk, just get to the next room. But it was like I'd lost my place in the script. I was showing up in scenes that didn't need me anymore. No one looked up when I entered the floor. My name had been taken off the calendar. My Slack account was still active, but nobody pinged me. I was still technically on file, waiting for HR's final processing. But we both knew what that meant. Mark had fired me without officially saying the word, and in the corporate world, that's worse. It makes you invisible, undefended, replaceable in slow motion. And that invisibility followed me home. I remember standing at the stove, trying to boil water for tea and realizing I'd already done it. Twice. The kettle was whistling, loud, but I hadn't heard it. I'd been staring at the wall, thinking about how my mother would have told me to wear red lipstick that day. A little color on your lips and they'll never know they hurt you. She was gone. And now so was I. For a moment I thought maybe this was it. Maybe it was time to accept what they'd been implying for months. You're behind the curve. You've got a great memory for the old way of doing things. She's stable. Stable. That one had been whispered like a curse. I opened my laptop again, not to work, but to close files, delete copies, let it all go. But muscle memory pulled me toward one folder I hadn't touched since the audit. FY Recon Corrected Versions. Inside it were months of files Mark had quietly asked me to adjust. Nothing illegal at a glance, just phrasing, timing, narrative control. Budgets shifted slightly to appear ahead. Client renewals celebrated when, really, they'd asked to downscale. Promises made in emails that Mark had edited post-meeting, with me looped in as a silent CC. I stared at the email chains, side by side with their attachments. And I realized I'd been keeping a record long before I knew why. It hadn't been revenge, just instinct. The next morning I walked into the office. I didn't say a word. No one greeted me. But Lena, God bless her, that sharp-eyed intern who noticed everything, looked up as I passed and mouthed, "He's in the conference room." He was. Along with the new guy, along with our biggest client, Dalcor Medical. I stood just outside the glass walls, watching through the ripple of reflections as Mark pointed to charts I had built, data I had collected, reports he never understood until I explained them twice. And I watched as he took credit again, like it was oxygen, like he couldn't survive without it. Something in me didn't crack. It aligned, clean and cold. When they broke for coffee, I walked in. Nobody stopped me. They didn't even notice until I was halfway to the table. Mark turned. "You're not on this project anymore," he said, almost laughing. "Security should have—" I cut him off with one sentence. "I'd like the record to show that I'm the one who reconciled the Q4 discrepancy you're pitching as a margin gain." Silence. You could hear the machine drip hot coffee behind me. That, and a single pen dropping from someone's hand. Mark tried to recover, but the client, Ms. Janice O'Neill, Dalcor's COO, was already frowning. "What discrepancy?" she asked. So I reached into my bag, not angry, not shaking, and I placed 3 folders gently on the table, each one labeled, each one with a timestamp. Audit trail, original email chain, the approved changes, the fake ones. I didn't say more. I just looked at Janice, not Mark. She opened the first folder and blinked. "This is not what we were told." Mark's voice wobbled slightly. "She's confused. That's outdated. We've already—" Then Lena walked in. She had followed me, quiet, brave. She said one thing, eyes locked on Mark. "She told me to print those last week. You told me to delete them." Another silence. He turned to her, red creeping up his neck. "That's not true. That's a serious accusation." She didn't back down. I made copies. And then it happened. Janice pushed her chair back. Slowly. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She just looked at Mark and said, "I think we'll need to postpone this discussion." He reached for the folders, but I was already collecting them again. Except for one. The last one. I slid it toward her and said, "That one's yours to keep." The room stayed still. Nobody dared to breathe too loudly. People in the hallway began to gather near the glass, pretending not to watch. Mark tried again. "We should talk about this privately." I smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just clearly. "We're already talking." And then without another word, I walked out, but not before turning back to Lena and meeting her eyes. She nodded. Tiny, but enough. And just like that, I wasn't invisible anymore. 3 weeks later, the quarterly town hall arrived. It was the biggest event our company held internally, live-streamed to regional offices, attended by board members, clients, stakeholders, a polished affair, rows of chairs arranged like chess pieces in the all-glass auditorium, spotlights grazing the steel stage, branded mugs, tiny mints, bottled water with the company logo, and Mark, he was the centerpiece. He stood at the podium like a man who had won a war. Wearing his tailored navy suit, he smiled with teeth that didn't belong in a mouth that said, "I don't care if your mother rose from the grave." His name flashed across the screen in bold type. Underneath it, the words, "Executive Spotlight, Vision, Growth, and the Future." I was standing at the back. Technically, I wasn't supposed to be there. I was no longer on the official employee registry. But Lena had quietly added my name to the guest list 2 nights earlier, under independent consultant. I didn't wear anything flashy, just a dark blouse, clean lines. My mother always said, "If they expect you to arrive quietly, let your truth arrive louder." As Mark launched into his speech, I watched the faces in the room. Most people smiled politely. A few took notes. The board sat stone-faced in the front row. Behind them, Janice O'Neill from Dalcor was seated. Her expression was unreadable. She hadn't canceled the account yet. She was waiting. And so was I. Mark walked the audience through our transformative Q4, parading success metrics and revenue growth. Every word he said had the sharp sheen of rehearsed fiction. He mentioned internal restructuring and how shifting roles had led to agility in operations. He didn't say my name, but he showed a slide, one I had built 6 months ago. Same fonts, same colors. The numbers had changed. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink, because I knew what came next. Right on cue, as he clicked to the next slide, the screen glitched. A flicker, just half a second, but enough to ripple the room's attention. And then, a new screen took over. It wasn't part of the slide deck. The title read, "Unedited Client Records, Dalcor Medical, Reconciliation Timestamps." The room hushed. Mark froze, pointer still aimed midair. From the audience, Lena stood up. She didn't speak yet. Just nodded toward the tech booth. That's where Jonah, one of the IT assistants, sat. He had agreed last night, after I showed him what Mark had done to his systems, how he'd demanded Jonah erase file logs, how he'd overridden read-only access with backdoor credentials. Jonah had backed everything up. Now it was playing out, slide by slide, each original report, each post-edited approved version, the data mismatches, the client feedback, the trailing email threads with timestamps and revision notes. Someone in the back gasped. Mark tried to move, but before he could speak, Janice stood up. She wasn't smiling. "Mr. Callahan," she said, "would you mind explaining the discrepancies on these documents?" He stammered. This wasn't supposed to be part of the presentation." She raised a brow. "Exactly." A few board members were already pulling out tablets. Whispers bounced across the first 2 rows. Mark turned toward the wings of the stage, signaling the booth. Jonah didn't respond. Instead, I stepped forward. The silence parted like a wave. I didn't walk to the stage. I didn't need to. I stopped just where the first row of chairs ended, where the light from the screen haloed over me. "I have copies of every document submitted for Q4, I said clearly, voice calm. "The originals, along with the audit trail that shows which versions were edited, who accessed them, and when." All eyes turned, including Mark's. He looked like someone who'd been punched and hadn't realized it yet. "You can't be here," he snapped. "This is a closed meeting." A member of the board turned. "And yet, I think we'd all like to hear what she has to say." I reached into my bag and held up a small black folder. No USB, just paper, plain and undeniable. "These are the same files I handed to your assistant weeks ago," I said. "Only now they include signatures, including Mark's." Mark took a step forward, his voice sharp. "This is a personal attack. She's been angry ever since. Since I took 5 days off to bury my mother," I said, "with your written approval." That stopped him. You could feel it ripple. Even the AC seemed to pause. Janice stepped closer. "Mr. Callahan, you told me she left abruptly. You said she failed to notify your office, that her department was in chaos." I didn't look at him. I looked at her. "Check the metadata in your inbox," I said softly. "You'll find a CC from me, the night I finalized your files and handed them to Mark." She turned back to him. "Is that true?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "There's been a misunderstanding." Lena stood up again, voice quiet but firm. "He told me to delete her name from the project folder, said we were starting clean." Another voice, this time from the tech booth. "Jonah. I still have the recovery logs." Now the silence wasn't tension, it was judgment, cold and growing. A board member leaned forward and said, "Ms. Whitley, would you mind joining us in the conference room after this presentation?" I nodded. "Of course." Mark looked around, eyes desperate. No one looked back. Finally, someone from corporate HR stood and whispered something to him. He didn't finish the presentation, didn't even gather his things. He stepped down from the stage, hands clenched, and walked straight toward the exit. But as he passed me, I said it, low enough for only him to hear, "Next time, read the names on the folder before you erase them." He paused, just for a beat, but he didn't look at me. He kept walking. After Mark walked off that stage, the room didn't return to normal. It couldn't. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was seismic, like everyone had just witnessed a building collapse in slow motion and was waiting for the dust to settle before daring to speak. People didn't clap, they didn't whisper. For a few minutes, no one even moved. Then the board stood, one by one, like dominoes, deliberate, unreadable. Janice from Dalcor nodded toward me, then followed them into the adjacent conference room. Lena sat down slowly. Jonah unplugged the projector. I stayed standing. That moment, no confetti, no victory music, was the most powerful silence of my life. They called me in 20 minutes later. The tone inside the boardroom wasn't accusatory. It was clinical, professional, respectful. I was asked to walk them through the timeline. I did, clearly, without embellishment. I had the files printed, organized by date, email trail, and approvals, all labeled. And at the end, one of the senior partners, someone I'd only exchanged holiday cards with, leaned back and said, "Why didn't you bring this forward sooner?" I looked at him and simply said, "Because no one was listening." He didn't argue. By the end of the day, Mark had been placed on administrative leave, pending formal investigation. By the end of the week, he was out entirely, not just fired, but scrubbed. His access revoked, his photo removed from the site, his projects reassigned. Corporate sent out a carefully worded email thanking him for his prior contributions. But everyone knew. You could feel it in the hallways. Suddenly, I wasn't invisible. People who hadn't spoken to me in months stopped to ask how I was. One manager, who once avoided my eye in elevators, offered to buy me coffee. And Lena started getting pulled into meetings she used to be excluded from. I heard her name mentioned in connection to a regional mentorship initiative. She didn't say it, but I knew. She was being watched now, in the best way. But the moment that stayed with me didn't come in a meeting room. It came 2 days after Mark's departure, as I was gathering my things from the shared storage closet where they'd quietly moved my old files. I found a note, wedged between 2 binders I'd forgotten I ever labeled. Plain envelope, 1 line inside. "You handled it with class. JM." JM stood for Jennifer Mathers, the head of HR. She had never once spoken to me beyond formalities. But this was something else. A small restoration of dignity, a quiet kind of justice. Later that week, the CEO called me directly. Not a representative, not an assistant. Him. He thanked me for my professionalism and the integrity I'd shown under pressure. He asked if I'd consider returning to my former role, this time with revised terms. I listened. I nodded. And then I declined. Not because I was bitter, but because I wasn't the same woman who had once needed their approval to feel worthy. Instead, I proposed something else. A limited-term contract. 3 months. I would document the transition, restructure the onboarding system, and train the next operations lead, someone young, someone like Lena. After that, I'd be done. He agreed. 3 days later, I walked into the same conference room where I was once erased, and this time, I sat at the head of the table. Not as an employee, but as someone in control, not out for revenge, just here to reclaim my story. And one by one, the people in the room, some nervous, some ashamed, some quietly grateful, began to see me differently, not as the woman they once overlooked, but as the standard they would be measured against. The final email I sent under my old company address was simple. Please direct all future correspondence regarding Q1 onboarding to Lena Torres. She has my full confidence. I hit send, logged out, closed the laptop, and for the first time in years, I smiled without a trace of hesitation. It's strange, the silence that comes after everything collapses and rebuilds. It's not loud like the applause that followed the boardroom twist. It's not frantic like the phone calls and interviews and contract rewrites. It's soft, gentle, the kind of silence that lets you hear yourself again. A few weeks after I declined the offer to return, on my own terms, no less, I found myself standing in the middle of my mother's garden. The one I'd helped her replant every spring since I was old enough to hold a trowel. The soil was a little too dry. The hose had a crack in it. The old bird bath was chipped. But I stood there, breathing it in, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to fix everything, just be. There's a photograph on the kitchen windowsill now. It's not framed, just leaned up against the glass. Me and Mom. I'm about 8. She's kneeling in the same spot I stood in, one arm around me, her other hand resting gently on a pot of marigolds. And I swear, when I look at that photo now, I see something different in her eyes. Back then, I thought it was just pride. Now I realize it was something else. A quiet knowing, a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It just shows up, even when nobody says thank you. That same week, I started teaching a part-time class at the local community college. Business ethics in practice. The irony didn't escape me. Trust me. I didn't wear suits anymore. Just a cardigan, slacks, sometimes denim on Fridays. But the first time I stood in front of a room full of students, fresh-eyed, eager, a little distracted, I realized I had something to offer them that no textbook ever could. Experience, not the kind you put on a resume, the kind that teaches you to stay when it hurts and to walk away when you're finally ready. One afternoon, a student stayed after class. She couldn't have been more than 19. "Professor?" she asked softly. "You always tell the truth, don't you?" I smiled. "I try." She hesitated. "You make it sound like we're allowed to leave bad places, even when we're scared." I nodded. "Especially then." She didn't say anything after that, but her shoulders shifted, something in her spine straightened, and I knew that moment would stay with her long after the semester ended. And me? I went home that night, poured a cup of tea, and didn't even check my email. Because peace, as it turns out, looks a lot like choosing not to explain yourself anymore. It looks like sleeping without replaying every conversation, like hearing your name and not flinching. It looks like walking into the grocery store, bumping into a former coworker who once said nothing when I was fired, and seeing the quiet apology in their eyes, even if no words passed between us. I don't need an apology anymore, because I know who I am, and I know what I'm not. I am not difficult. I am not too expensive. I am not just emotional because of the funeral. I am someone who stood still when others ran, who buried her mother with grace, who lost her job, her dignity, and then, bit by bit, gathered herself back. So if you're listening to this right now and you've ever been made to feel invisible, if they took your silence for weakness or your absence for an opportunity to replace you, I hope you know this story was for you. You are not what they called you. You are what you survived. And what you choose to become next, that's the part they can't touch. You're still here. And that matters. If you've lived through something like this, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if someone you know is quietly surviving something like this, share it with them. They might need to know they're not alone. Stick around. We tell stories for those who've been quiet too long.